Hey everyone, and welcome to Coffee and Compete, the show that breaks down the news, gossip, and tactics of competitive business strategy. I'm your host, Adam McQueen, and joined with me, as he always is, Klue's competitive enablement manager, Hunter Stones. Hunter, what's going on, buddy?
Chillin' and killin'.
Chillin' and killin'. Also joined today, special guest, director of product marketing, first-time guest on the show, Hunter's boss as well. He actually wanted to just check up on what we were actually doing in the spare time. We just kept booking meetings. It's Cody Bernard. Cody, what's going on, dude?
How's it going? Happy to be here.
I'm excited to have Cody here. We've got some awesome content to get into today. A really topical news story. First of all, thank you everyone that tuned into episode 1. Showed us some love on socials. There was some awesome DMs, messages. We really, really appreciate that. Exciting launch to get the show on the road. And we're excited to be back for episode 2 here. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, even if you listen on Stitcher, which I don't know if anyone actually listens on Stitcher. Still give us a 5-star rating. We appreciate it. And check out the video episodes on YouTube as well. All right, let's keep this train moving. We're going to kick this off with how we kick off every episode. What's brewing in the world of compete? So Hunter, who is winning and who is losing?
All right, well, super excited for this one today. We've got CEOs who are getting attention for airing their competitors' dirty laundry in public. And so they might be winning, but their businesses might be losing. So, okay, let's go back a couple weeks. So Warmly's CEO is running through a qualified compete deck on LinkedIn and absolutely tearing it up. He's going off about some allegedly false claims in the compete deck, and he's basically just airing a whole bunch of dirty laundry in the process here. UserGem's CEO, totally unrelated business, jumps into the comments and starts going after Warmly's CEO for having an error on their own competitive landing page. Okay. Common Room's CEO then jumps into the comments again and starts going after UserGems for their own aggressive post where they were calling out Klue a few days earlier. So we've got a whole bunch of different startup CEOs who are jumping into the comments here on LinkedIn, in the LinkedIniverse, and they're commenting on each other. They're airing some dirty laundry. They're talking about their competitors and other people's competitors. It's just a whole show here. And so the jury's still not totally out on how this is impacting their companies and their personal brands, but it's exciting at the very least, and it's sparking a lot of attention. So
it is exciting. And Cody was actually our newsbreaker on this. He dropped this into our marketing team Slack and was like, I got thoughts. Check this out. It's like this weird Russian doll of CEOs calling one another out, and like the thread started unwind. I felt like we were TMZ in that moment. We got a lot to unpack here because there's some like really interesting tactical stuff, especially around the compete deck you mentioned. But first off, Cody, there are some very distinct approaches by the different CEOs playing out here on LinkedIn when it comes to addressing the competition. Of these different approaches, which of them lands and which of them flops, and why?
That's a really good question. Before diving into it, just as a product marketer, I'm a person that really loves products. So I do want to give a shout out to like all of these CEOs and their companies have really awesome products. It's awesome to see how the space has started to like evolve and mature over the last few years. I think what doesn't necessarily land for me is this idea of going at your competitors in public. I think that there's the age-old adage of, any press is good press, whether it's good or bad. And I just think that it's very fun to see it kind of unfold. But I think just the overall tactic itself, I didn't really vibe with. I think one thing that actually did stand out as a positive was the Common Room CEO in her post that was separate from this this LinkedIn thread that was happening that initiated from the Warmly CEO's post. And that was more geared around this idea that they're focused on the customer problems, right? Like they're focused on going after the status quo, and that their take on it was that they're going to focus strictly there, but also giving like a hat tip to their competitors. I actually thought that was an awesome angle. I think that although they, took a little bit of a jab at their competitors saying we wouldn't necessarily go that route, I think that probably could have been left out. But I think that was actually a really interesting angle that that person took. But yeah, I think ultimately going at your competitors in public is very interesting. It's kind of like one of those topics that I think people just have their own points of view on. You saw some people that chiming in that were, pro message. You saw some people chiming in that were like, this is a little bit cheesy. But I think where I personally stand is I want to let our product do the talking. I want to let our employees do the talking. I want to let our brand do the talking, right? Like I want to focus on how do we solve for the customer problem in the best way possible. So I think if they took a different angle and instead of going at like a deck, like that qualified built, and maybe taking some of those points that were coming across in the deck and reframing it versus like giving your competitor all this time and attention on LinkedIn, which is a benefit for them, and saying, hey, here's some of the things that we know that are coming out in the market that aren't necessarily truthful, and going in a different path and saying like, hey, we want to dispel some of those rumors. That might have landed a little bit better, I think.
What I noticed in this example, and I think a trend, I mean, we're talking about this little example, which I'm not sure who in the Klue team dubbed it Compete Gate. It might have been Katie, which I love. This is one example, but there's a trend happening over the past maybe year or so of CEOs calling out the competitors more and more on LinkedIn. And one thing I'm seeing with this Warmly example and maybe some examples in the past is there seems to be a trend of the smaller player punching up or doing sort of the younger sibling poke the bear, poke the bear, poke the bear. And I'm not necessarily sure if it's to get a reaction, to kind of engage, but that seems to be a trend I'm seeing. And Hunter, you were kind of mentioning that to me when we were eating lunch before recording here.
Yeah, so the general consensus, I mean, you could call it that, the general consensus in the Compete community is if you're going to punch, you typically don't want to punch down. Like sometimes, maybe, depending on the circumstance, you can punch horizontally, but it's usually, at least in some cases, fine to punch up. And so you see that with a bunch of different examples. Apollo punching up to Zoom info is one that we see a lot on LinkedIn, for example. But the question is, can you take it too far? And I think the answer is yes. And I'm not necessarily saying that in any of these particular examples, I'm not going to call out like which ones might have been taking it too far. But typically I would say like, yeah, you can take it a little bit too far. If you're starting to throw too much mud at your competitor, there's a difference between calling out your differentiated value and then maybe slinging mud where it shouldn't be. So I think that that's a really important distinction here. It's a bit of a blurry line. And so we can clearly see that here. There's not a clear distinction of what should I be saying about our competitors if I'm punching up and what should I not say. But there is some type of distinction there between taking it too far and maybe not.
Cody, I want to flip this over to you too, because as well, I think sort of this going at your competitors, sparking controversy as a marketing team, and as we see how kind of like algorithms work, controversy creates engagement increases eyeballs, and what you started with is maybe that old adage of no bad press is good press, any press is good press, something to do with press, get attention. That's what we care about. And CEOs, this founder-led brand is like such a spearhead of a lot of B2B companies' marketing tactics now. Where do you stand on this? That like clearly controversy is getting eyeballs, but is that backfiring in the long term for these companies and these individuals? Like where do you sit on that as you're kind of observing this trend play out?
I think buyers want their vendors to solve their problems, not have shouting matches on social. I just think it kind of comes off a little bit, it's off-putting, I would say, in my opinion. I think especially when it's unprovoked. I think if you're being provoked, it's a little bit different. There's like coming to your own defense, either, it's an employee or your product or something. It's a little bit different. But if it's unprovoked, coming out of nowhere, like, I think there was a newsjacking of a product release or a press release that was just focused on all of this is terrible, or it was just very negative. I think that was really interesting to me. But I think that is where I think there is this disconnect in what they're trying to accomplish with founder brand versus what a buyer is actually going to gravitate towards and resonate with. And I think ultimately everyone wants the best product, and buyers just want to go with what's going to solve their needs. So if you can just kind of reframe it, I think, and focus the message that you're trying to get across as how it is going to help solve a problem for your buyer, it's going to come across better.
There's a lot of layers to this, which I liked. We've tackled this sort of CEO piece of this, but founders with lots of money and potentially bigger egos bickering online isn't the only competitive story here. There's a couple of tactical things which I found really interesting. Cody had some takes, you got some takes as well. Specifically, sort of the starting point of this story of Warmly CEO going through Qualified's compete deck. Now, Cody, I'm going to flip this to you again. Can you explain quickly like what a compete deck is? Is that something companies should be doing, shouldn't be doing? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think a compete deck is sometimes used within the sales process when you haven't necessarily differentiated enough, where your buyer is asking for more information about how you're different. So that could be a feature request, a feature list that they might be looking for. It could be a few slides around differentiation that, hit on a particular problem that a feature solves for. In my opinion, if you're at a point where you're using a compete deck within the sales process, you haven't done your job as a seller to differentiate enough within the sales process. You haven't one vendor of choice. There's still a lot of work for you to do to sell your buyer on why your solution is the best fit to solve for their problem.
Hunter, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, whether you use a compete deck or not, you need to be focused on addressing the actual pains of the buyer. And this kind of comes back to, Cody, what you're saying before with, CEOs calling each other out. Is your product actually addressing a problem for the buyer? That's like the most important thing here, right? So one of the things that I would kind of call out here is, at Klue, we used to use compete decks. And that was, it's something that we've used in the past. We approach this in a slightly different way now. And we think that this is maybe a better way to go in the future, which is more of like a differentiated value deck. So it's basically a deck. It's got a variety of different proof points in it that a seller can pull into their first call deck or different demo decks or something like that, that have different points that we know are differentiators against our top competitors, that the seller can lean into if they know that that's going to be a really important thing for the buyer. But again, this comes back to what is actually important to the buyer, what's actually going to help solve that buyer's problem. So you can imagine an example where, an SDR runs an intro call, they learn about the buyer's pains, they learn about their needs. The AE is, looking through the notes or reviewing that call, and they see, okay, this is a differentiator we can lean into. This is a differentiator that we can lean into. Now I'm going to pull those slides into the first call deck and, not necessarily call these out as, hey, we're better than the competitor here, but it's a place that maybe we should lean in a little bit further because we know that this is an area of differentiated value for us.
That is awesomely put. And I think there's something to, I think when Cody, what really irked Cody, he's being very polite and polished. He's on camera talent, but behind the scenes, the compete deck irked him. As a product marketer at heart and a great one at that, he's like, I hate seeing this out in the wild, especially as something that's just kind of being dumped out there. It felt like it was like, hey, this is my leave behind. All the reasons why we're good and they suck. And I think what, to both of your points, is throughout that whole thing, and even the Warmly CEO's response was, where was the buyer in any of those pieces? Whether it was the original deck or the response, where did the buyer get introduced or prioritized throughout all of that? And that felt like the biggest gap from my perspective. There's
two things that came across to me, and that one is all of it, for the most part, was completely subjective, right? Like the Warmly CEO called out, there were so many inaccuracies. So one, when it comes to a deck like that and version control, you need to make sure that you're staying on top of that, especially if you're going to be using it in your sales process. Otherwise, it's going to be completely just dismissed if you're able to overcome any of those objections, if that is shared with you from your buyer, which in this case it was. The second piece of it is that, to your point, it was focused strictly around feature lists. It was literally breaking down integrations. It was breaking down, particular features as it relates to reverse IP lookup. All of these things were so technical that it's do you do these things? Yes, but we just might do it in a different way, or no, we don't do these things, or actually, no, we do these things, but none of it had anything to do with value. Nothing had anything to do with use cases, or anything that was rooted in the pain. And I think from a product marketer's perspective, everything that we do, every piece of content that we build, every piece of messaging that we build, any piece of communication that we have internally or externally needs to be rooted in the problem that or the buyer is experiencing. And I think that was just completely missed the mark in this case.
All right, thank you so much, Cody, for joining us to break down CompeteGate, arguably the juiciest story happening in B2B SaaS right now. Next up, we've got Hunter chatting with Trevor Evans. Actually, in person, he came out in studio, the head of competitive intelligence over at Qualtrics, and you broke down everything to do with standing up a win-loss program. He's got one of the best around. Ton of tips, ton of tactics that people need to tune in if they're working on win-loss in their business. Before we do so, quick thing, new roasts, what's happening in the community, new shows, new events. August 22nd, which is actually today, the Marketech episode with Devin Reed and Emma Strand all around improving your messaging and translating that into content. It went down, so if you didn't tune into the live episode, it will be out next week. Check it out. Two of the best around, and Rowan and Morgan are the best. Also, August 30th, we have our next Power Half Hour where we'll be digging into the 5 questions you need to ask your buyer. And before we leave you here, Cody, as the Director of Product Marketing, you've been here now for, what have you been here, 6 months? I want you to share your favorite Klue feature that is shipped since you've been here and why.
That's a really good question. I think what comes to mind to me is probably the launch that we did for Klue Insights and just the value that I personally get as a product marketer just from that feature itself is crazy. So thinking about everything a product marketer has going on, messaging, positioning, pricing, and packaging, the whole 9, getting insights from your buyers is very important to inform a lot of that work, right? So when you think about what types of buyer intel do you have access to, going out and looking at G2 reviews, going and reading through win-loss interviews, sitting in on sales calls, whether it's live or going back and, listening to Gong recordings, the ability to analyze all of those different buyer intel touch points at scale so that I don't have to sit there for hours and hours sifting through it and trying to find trends that pop up is wildly valuable to me. And yes, seems like a pitch, kind of is, but honestly, it's not, because I've used it personally in everything that we're doing here with a lot of the work that we have going on the product marketing team. So shout out to the Klue product team. That was awesome. Can't wait to see what we do with it next.
I'm excited too. All right, let's kick it over to your conversation, Hunter, with Trevor Evans.
We're here today with Trevor Evans, Head of Competitive Intelligence at Qualtrics. Trevor.
Hi, I'm Trevor Evans, and I am the Head of Competitive Intelligence at Qualtrics, just like he said.
Great to have you here today. Super excited for this. Super excited. We're going to be covering a ton of ground around competitive intelligence, around win-loss today. So this is going to be super exciting. How are you feeling?
Feeling great. Love the studio here. Love the new mug. This is a loaner, but I'm planning on keeping it. Yeah, I'm just excited to be here with Klue.
Awesome. Well, here, let's dive into win-loss compete, the reason that we're all here. So let's start with the end in mind here. Can you paint us a picture of what best-in-class win-loss and competitive intel looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing for best-in-class win-loss is the right people at the company are reading it and using it. I think if at a very basic level, hey, we send surveys to customers and we aggregate insights based on segment, product, industry, region, whatever, and we share those insights with sales leaders, with enablement, the executive team, and they're actually using it. You can say, hey, we learned this and this and this, and we did this and this as a result. We went back, we reported the executive team, hey, this is what we're doing, this is how we're changing or making decisions based on what we're learning. I think at its core, that's the foundational most important thing is, are you doing something with it? And could your sellers say that you're doing something with it? Do they know the compete program exists? They know they can come to you with questions. They know you're actually creating content for the competitors that they're working against, and they value that. They see it's updated regularly, and that you're providing insights and actions across the organization. I mean, that's a big lift, even that level, but that's, if you're not doing things that your sellers and your leaders are noticing with that information, why are you doing it all? Is it just for people to confirm their biases? Oh, I knew that. Okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. If it's not resulting in change, it's not worth its weight.
So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of where win-loss and competitive intel come together. There are different concepts, but there's a lot of overlap between these two areas. So where do you see these two different areas coming together? And then I'm also curious, where do you see sort of the separation and the differences there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, I think of like compete programs as almost just a subset of an overall win-loss, because as an organization, you are winning and losing deals either to competitors or to the status quo, or they're going to keep doing stuff in-house and, solving problems with manual processes and interns and additional hires. And, like that story, like of why are we winning and losing? Sales leaders are talking, why did we win or lose this deal? Product leaders, why are we winning and losing these deals? Because the products we have, or the features, or what are the gaps that we need to address to overcome? Like, how should we change our roadmap based on the feedback that we're getting? Executives like feeling pressure from the board, or like, hey, we're not winning enough, or we're not ripping out competitors enough. We have a revenue gap. We're only hitting 90% of our annual goal. Like, how can we reposition based on, there's just different groups across the organization who need to do things differently if you're not hitting the revenue numbers, the win rate numbers, the quotas that you want to go hit, the renewal rates that you want to hit. And so you have all these different stakeholders across the business who need that information and need to take action on it. And those actions are differently. And so making sure that your win-loss program, particularly in competitive situations, like when you're looking at a feature list, like, oh, we have our grid and we have these 20 capabilities or differentiators, and this is our response to like why our competitors can't do them as well. There's the positioning that product marketing will do based on those insights to, update the battle cards. Hey, this is our new strategy against this competitor because they're seeing that they're actually winning a lot in situations like this. And we actually need to create some assets. Like, some of the things that we've identified recently are, around specific competitors, that we see a lot. And, the same things that they were, the same fear, uncertainty, doubt that they were able to put into the heads of potential buyers, people, their own customers who were considering moving over to Qualtrics, like the same plays that they're running to create that fear are still working 5 years later. And there's specific things we can do as a product marketing org to develop different types of customer evidence.
So what's an example of like one of those small wins? Because you talk about this idea that there's, you can take some of these insights, find some like really small wins based on those that you can put into action, start having an impact on the business. What's an example of one of those that's maybe played out in Qualtrics?
So like a small win or something you identify, like, hey, we noticed, this small thing about this competitor where we had an update. Like a lot of people across the org who are competing against this competitor didn't know that X was happening. And, if a buyer, that you were going to, and you brought up a question around it, like, it would just plant a small amount of uncertainty or create a conversation. And so, the big changes are often like, oh, we need to completely pivot our strategy. But in a smaller case, it might be, hey, like, start asking this question in the sales cycle, early in the sales cycle when you are competing against competitor X. And then you find that it actually surfaces a lot of information and they start asking you questions. And so there's been a lot of things like that where, we just made a small tweak to like something and sales reps started using a new question in discovery. And it's as simple as that. And that question has a big impact because we're confident it will because of what's going on with that competitor. And so like, I think the smaller changes, another small change and something that I try to do a lot is let's go talk to 3 sellers about why it is that, or about a deal where this situation happened, and let's just share those stories with the field. I think one of the most engaging things to sellers is stories of how other people won or lost a deal like theirs. And that's what I think resonates more. Most of the time when we're doing an enablement session, we have an idea of what we want to enable or train on. And then it's like, well, what are some customer stories or what are some sales stories that we can go to where a seller can get up and talk about like how they went into that circumstance? Because that's what sellers like perk up most for. It's like, oh, this is a person like me up there talking about a deal that they just won and they got this big commission check because of that deal that they won, and I want to win a deal like that, and I'm gonna learn from what they did. Like sellers are very eager to learn from each other, and so I think you might have an insight. And you could just put it as a bullet point on, a battle card to say, oh, start saying this. And the seller would be much more interested to learn, well, here are 3 deals where we won a deal because we said that.
Like what we're kind of talking about here is interviews, surveys, great, but there's so much more context that you can get by, looking at what your sellers are doing, what the CRM is saying, what, your conversational intelligence tool is saying. So, the podcast listeners here, they're sort of hearing all these different sources, additional sources that you can go to find win-loss insights. Can you give some examples about, you've touched on this a little bit, but how do you take those insights and now put them into action at scale?
I think that, that's very much, I think, a lot on whoever's running the program to understand the different stakeholders who want the data and want to take action on it. And so, like in my role, like I'll have product marketers reach out to me. I'll have product managers reach out to me. I'll have like a corporate strategy reach out to me. I'll have sellers reach out to me. I'll have enablement reach out to me. Like I have all these people who are saying like, hey, like I have a question. I want to be able to answer this question. Are people, do they like this feature and this thing? And the default when I tell them, maybe we don't have a lot of data on that particular thing, they might say, well, how can I go to the customer and ask them? Like, how can we add it to our win-loss survey? Can we do it? Like, I can't do that for everyone. Like, we can't have a 200 question long win-loss survey. And so for those people, like the questions they have are research questions. And I have to think, is our system set up to be able to answer that question where it's feeding them this information so that, because they want to take action on the data, and what they're saying is, I don't have the data to take action, and I'm just going to have to go with my gut or my other research. I don't have any good customer anecdotes from interviews telling me that this feature should or shouldn't, is or isn't helping us win deals, and this is why or why not. And so I think that like a really good North Star around action is, what are the questions that different stakeholders across the company who have a need for win-loss data, what are the questions that they're asking, and what is the corresponding actions that they're wanting to take? And so if you understand, the product team, they're wanting to do a quarterly review of all the insights. So they're not necessarily just like every survey comes in and they take actions. They have a quarterly process where they're evaluating their roadmap and the direction they should take and the investments they should do. And the product managers they're thinking about what they should do. And they're talking to, sales reps, and they're getting anecdotes, they're hearing things from customers like, okay, like they need to make these types of decisions on a quarterly basis. How am I making sure that like I can provide them that data, the program can, on a quarterly basis that like is a week before that meeting they have where they make that decision to take that action, like to make sure that like, okay, we need conversational intelligence. We need to set up meeting recordings. I'm going to work with revenue operations and sales leadership because I know that product marketing or product management needs to have these answers to these questions. And so I want to equip them with the data that they need. So I'm going to go and spend a quarter or two getting conversational intelligence turned on and figuring out how I work with the data and how I can feed them that. And so, because otherwise, so I need to adapt to how these different organizations make decisions and make sure they're getting win-loss data at the right time so that they can take those actions. And then I can say, for my own selfish reasons, hey, look, we have a process or product. I work with product every quarter, and we provide this information to them and these insights. We provide it by competitor, and we provide it by product or whatever we're doing. And then they take those and they use those insights to make changes to their roadmap or to do follow-up research. Like we might provide them 5 deals that are great examples of, feature X doing well, like having an impact, and then they go and follow up and they talk to the customer and whatever they do with the information. Like I'm not overworking myself in saying I'm going to do all this work for them, because it's a lot. It can be very exhausting. But building a system where I can say to marketing leadership, to sales leadership, look, we now have a stream of insights from the field, from customers directly to product. And so when you have insight, when you have feedback, when the customer is saying this feature isn't good enough, that's just happening automatically. And you can kind of like put your feet up and know that the system is working for the business.
I feel like there's so much we can unpack there. I want to specifically focus in on the revenue side. So like specifically on sales enablement here. Can you tell us about a time like at Qualtrics where win-loss insights actually helped a seller win a deal? What was that like?
Yeah. This is from quite a bit of long ago. But for me, one of the things I was focused on earlier in my career was late stage deals, RFPs, like final presentations. Like what at the end of the sales cycle is really impacting our likelihood to win? What are the things that sales could do at that point where the customer had already gotten all the messaging? They've already seen our differentiators. They've seen all the platforms demoed. Like it's very much, sales skill, relationships, like that's where the sales tactics become especially important, is late in the sales cycle. And we found that there were some different strategies that we used toward the end of the sales cycle. Like we would at the RFP stage do like a very beautiful response. Like we felt like we were wanting to demonstrate that we were a serious player in the space, and we were the thought leader, and we were the innovator, and we were the disruptor. And so, we would do these books, these booklets. We would do them digitally printed that would be the RFP response, but not your typical Excel response and Word doc, and procurement is going to just look over it, and anyone from sales or any other buyers are going to just I'm not really reading the RFP. I'll just see the final presentation. We would make it then these very beautiful booklets and send it to them, take it on site for the post RFP presentation, and say hey, we know that you're trying to do this as a business. Here's what your program's going to look like. Here's how it's going to address the business value and the needs that you're going to have. We would do shorter ones that were just an executive level view, executive summary. And we found that when we started doing this, that the win rates went up. And so it wasn't just because it was extra resources, it was extra effort. I was managing the team responsible for a lot of the work. And so if we're going to all this extra effort, is actually making a difference. And we found that it did make a significant difference in a lot of cases where our win rates went up 10 to 20%. And it wasn't just the data says we win more. It's selection bias. You're late in the sales process. If you put a lot of effort into the deal, there's more likely to win. So is there a third variable? But the anecdotes that we got back from customers as part of this, looking at the win-loss, is this actually having an impact? The anecdotes from sellers was, no, this kind of helped tell our story in the right way at the right time and built confidence, because earlier on, we were newer to the space. We were disrupting legacy platforms that were very rigid, very limiting, and we offered something new, a new way of doing customer experience that was better, that was more responsive, that was faster, that empowered better action across the business. And these booklets told them that even though we were newer to the space and all of our competitors were saying, oh, Qualtrics they're just a survey company. They're just, they're new. They don't know how to take care of your program. These booklets saying, yes, no, we understand exactly what you need, and we have a solution. You can be confident that we're not a risk. It's actually more of a risk to keep doing what you're doing than it is to move over on Qualtrics. And it told that story really well. So that became a standard part of how we moved into the CX space more and more for many years. And it was just really successful. And the win-loss data helped reinforce that what we were doing, which was extra effort, extra investment, extra headcount, it made a difference in our largest, biggest deals, and we should keep doing it.
For a lot of the folks listening to this podcast, they're in situations where they may be building their win-loss program for the very first time. And something that we often hear, and we've talked about this a lot today, but something that we often hear is that you'll collect win-loss insights, but then they'll kind of just sit stale. They'll maybe get used by the admins of the program or something like that, but they won't really get put into action by the rest of the org. So for the folks who are listening, who are in the very early stages of building their win-loss program, what's the one tactical tip that you would give them for making sure that their win-loss insights get put into action?
I think ensuring that you make it real. And what I mean by that is if you just have the interview go out and it's being notified, everyone's being notified, they see it in the email, they read the interview or whatever it is, you're not ensuring that people are actually digesting and using that information. So I talked about relationships, and having a relationship with sales leaders, having relationships with enablement, where you're checking and saying hey, this is how we think you should use this information. Are you using this in enablement sessions? These are the different ways that you can use this in enablement sessions. Enablement leader may say we like talking about win-loss. Well, can I make sure that we're interviewing the types of deals that you're doing training on? You're doing a big training on this in 2 months or 1 month. Let me partner with, whoever does our interviews, or if we do them internally or surveys, let's make sure that we have good win-loss stories that can, we have an internal perspective. We can also try to get a customer perspective, so that when you do that enablement session, we have the voice of the customer. And when we tell that story, you might have a 45-minute enablement session. Sales is going to perk up when you're talking about an actual deal with an actual customer and the issues that we ran into throughout the sales process. And so, what the customer said, what they liked, what they didn't like that's going to make that enablement more engaging, more powerful. And it's going to result in sales reps more likely to actually change their behavior. Oh yeah, Amex, that deal, I'm going to do things differently because of what I saw from that. whereas like the behavior change, the actions that sales is taking, like it's just not real. It's not if you don't leverage this information and make sure that enablement is leveraging it the right way. You meet with sales managers and say, like, how are you talking about wins and losses with your team? Are you using these? Making sure that they're using it, that's when it becomes real. Versus, so it's always real. Real might not have been the right word, but like, do your stakeholders, does sales know how to use the information to make them more successful? And that's usually a few extra steps. And so it's just making sure that at the very basic level, if you're starting to do win-loss, that you're talking to your stakeholders and you actually know how they're using it. And they might say like, I read it and that's fine. And that's all I do. I'm like, well, maybe you should do, like, I'd love to join your team meeting and actually do, even if it's every quarter, every month, like I could do a training on a particular win-loss and they can ask questions. I can bring the seller from that deal in. It's just a lot of grassroots work to make sure that like it's being, that the work you're doing is really being applied.
Any last tips or tricks or anything that you want to share with the audience here about win-loss?
I'd say that like when you have a culture like of win-loss matters and we want to win and we want to get better, it's really refreshing. It's fun. I think the journey you might go through to get buy-in around doing win-loss in a more holistic way and really connecting with the front lines, it may seem really intimidating. Like for some people like me, it's easier. I've worked with sales my whole career. Like I feel very comfortable, very confident, meeting a new sales leader, like saying, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to help you. But like for others, that might be really intimidating. But like once you're in and you start seeing that impact to real deals and stuff, it's so exciting. It's worth the journey, I guess, is a way of putting it. Like keep going. Don't give up. Like if you're working harder to get connected to the front lines and making sure what you're doing actually makes a difference, like you're going to get there. And even though it's tough, it can be tough.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been an excellent conversation. We've talked a lot today about win-loss, and this has been great. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I've loved it. Thank you for having me. And I guess I never drank anything, so. There we go.
Awesome. Well, that was a great conversation with Trevor. It's super fun talking to people who are running win-loss programs at the highest level, and I just feel like there were some great learnings from that.
Totally was. That's a wrap on episode 2 here. We'll catch you next week, actually, for our community session that we ran previously on how to use sales calls for competitive intel. And then we'll get you to next week, too, with some more competitive news stories and more tactics for you all. If you haven't already, please give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Thanks again.